Good evening and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. All right, that's a little Blue Christmas by Elvis Presley, 1957, as we continue the 1950s Part 2. All right, so we're going to get into Presidency Eisenhower a little bit. All right, so as I told you before, it was dynamic conservatism was his phrase, to be conservative with money but liberal with human beings. Okay, some of his significant pieces of legislation, most significant was the Federal Highway Aid Act of 1956. This is actually a defense measure, all right? So kind of passed in the height of the Cold War, and it creates the interstate highway system. And what a surprise, I-290, as some of you might know, is called, yes, the Eisenhower. And I-90 is called the Kennedy. So let's take a wild guess which one was built first, all right? Yeah, the highways obviously sprang up in Chicago and then started going around the country. We see a lot of good things come about this. We see people moving out to the suburbs, all right? We start to see more automobiles being built, cars able to go faster, higher speed limits, okay? People being able to go cross country, all right? Stuff like that, all right? We also see some negative effects. You see a lot of urban decay and white flight as people start to leave the cities to get away from the diversity and the congestion and that kind of stuff, and then move out to the suburbs for a lot of various different reasons. All right, so good essay topic about the positives, negatives of the highway system, perhaps. All right. Also, in 1957, Russia's going to do something called Sputnik. They're going to shoot a satellite into outer space, which is going to scare the bejesus out of the Americans, because if they can put a satellite into space to communicate, they could also possibly shoot nuclear missiles into space. So Congress responds quickly and swiftly and passes the National Defense Education Act of 1958, which is going to place a much greater emphasis on math and science. All right, why is that? Yes, it's because of Sputnik, because we need to beat the Russians into space. So we need to be able to have better scientists, better mathematicians, so we can beat them, to prove that our capitalist way of life is better than their communist way of life. Okay, and you can check out 270towin.com and look at the elections of 52 and 56, but it's the same two candidates in both elections. Eisenhower running as the Republican, the war hero, against Adlai Stevenson, the former governor of Illinois, who's actually buried down in Bloomington near Illinois State. And you probably heard of Adlai Stevenson before. I'm not sure where, maybe something about football or something like that. If you get a chance, all right, don't look at Mr. John Green there. He doesn't have any good videos on the 50s. That's why I got to record these. This is really the birth of political advertising. So we saw about consumer advertising, we saw about television shows, but we start to see candidates use ads to campaign for the presidency. And these are great ads to look at just to kind of get the mood of the country. But this one here, I Like Ike, is a classic. If you watch it, it's literally 1 minute long, okay? And then if you go to 1956, okay, there's this one here called The Man from Libertyville. All right, it's the fourth one down, okay, under Democrats for Stevenson. They're great contrasting ads. We're going to look at these more in government next year, but if you can look at them now, you can kind of see the difference of how Eisenhower sought to campaign for the presidency and Stevenson, and figure out who won out. All right, so if you'd like to write up a short comparison of Eisenhower versus Stevenson from these two ads, The Man from Libertyville and I Like Ike, I might throw a few extra enrichment points in the grade book for you. So I Like Ike and Man from Libertyville, if you want to take a look at those. All right? And then just write up a short comparison of the two and bring it in. So nothing for the word wall necessarily. All right. So finally, all right, we're going to look at foreign policy a little bit and the expansion of the Cold War. I mentioned Sputnik already. So Russia being able to put a satellite into outer space is going to really scare America to get crazy to try and beat the Russians and try and see if we can put something into space and maybe even get a nuclear missile to shoot at them. All right. Eisenhower is going to come up with a phrase in his farewell address. So in your notes, you should write Eisenhower's farewell address here. He's going to refer to something called the military-industrial complex, and that's a speech worth watching if you get an opportunity. But what he's really referring to is that now that the Cold War is here and we have this ability to shoot a nuclear missile and blow up the world, essentially, our military is constantly needs to be ready immediately. This can't be like World War II or World War I where we can stay isolated, not make anything, and we'll gradually get ready for the war and retool and get ready. So now we're going to have a permanent military establishment to make planes, helicopters, missiles, machine guns, and so on. And Eisenhower says this is bad because these businesses only make money if we're at war. So we have to be careful to not seek conflicts because our businesses, our military industrial complex, the military businesses want us to get involved in them. Instead, we should really go back to what our true values were, and that's being the policeman of the world and looking out for humanitarian causes and not seek conflicts just because we want to make money. And that's going to lead into Vietnam possibly. All right, Eisenhower's Secretary of State was a guy named John Foster Dulles, and he coined a phrase called Brinksmanship, and that's going to be our foreign policy. All right, instead of sitting down with the Russians and negotiating and talking with them and going back and forth, let's build the heck out of our nuclear arsenal to the point we are on the brink of nuclear war, and make Russia think that we'll blow them out of the world and they'll blow us out of the world if we go to war, and that will in turn make us not want to go to war. Okay. The theory had an acronym. It was called MAD, which is a little crazy, called Mutually Assured Destruction. We blow them up, they blow us up, therefore we won't have a war. Okay, so that's like saying your neighbor goes out and buys an M16 machine gun, you do the same thing, nobody will kill anybody. All right, go try that. Don't try that, especially with this on film or on recording. All right, Eisenhower also takes the CIA, which we'll hopefully get to in the video Tuesday in class. It's called Central Intelligence Agency, and starts to use them to support some of our missions around the world to overthrow some of these communist countries, or these countries that are leaning toward communism. Most significant was Iran. Imagine that, Iran and us not getting along. That's kind of weird. But we have an overthrow of the Iranian elected government and put the Shah back in, who was more friendly and supported the United States and anti-communist, and another one down in Guatemala. So we start to see the CIA do some covert and secretive things to overthrow leaders in other countries. All right. Eisenhower also comes up with a phrase called the Domino Theory. All right, now you've all played with dominoes as kids. You've lined them up. There's actually a real game to this, but you line them up, you put them in a row, you knock one over, and they all fall down. Well, Eisenhower said that about Southeast Asia, okay? And that if in Southeast Asia, if one of those countries, like a Vietnam or a Thailand or a Burma, became communist, they would all fall to communism. So how do you stop the domino theory? You stop one country from becoming communist, and that happened to be Vietnam. So that's going to lead us to the Vietnam War, is this idea of stopping communism before it continues to spread and all fall down into that. The Eisenhower Doctrine, and you might say, ooh, we just learned about the Truman Doctrine, we've got a Monroe Doctrine, we've got a Roosevelt Corollary, there's some great synthesizing going on there, but the Eisenhower Doctrine applied to the Middle East, and that America was going to, again, protect its interests there and look out to resist communist expansion in the Middle East. Why is the Middle East important? You guessed it. All right, I won't even tell you. And then finally, in 1959, we were about to have a historic summit between Eisenhower and Khrushchev. They're going to sit down, they're going to talk about nuclear missiles, they're going to talk about disarming our nuclear arsenals. And it's going to possibly, maybe even end the Cold War. Khrushchev actually visited the country and went on tours with Eisenhower. Eisenhower lived at Gettysburg, so he went and toured the battlefield with Eisenhower, and they were pretty good friends. And they were going to have this summit to talk about disarming ourselves and going back to some normalcy before all this nuclear arms race. But we had a spy plane, all right, called U-2, and it was a plane that literally flew almost in outer space that could spy on other countries, and it got shot down by the Soviets over the very eastern part of Russia. And the president, assuming that this U-2 pilot, because these were CIA guys, these were top-notch spies, they're supposed to kill themselves. They were flying with cyanide pills, so he assumed the pilot was dead when this plane crashed. So he came out and said it was a weather plane, and the Soviets were shot at an unarmed plane, which it was unarmed, which is true. Then the pilot named Francis Gary Powers gets put on television, and he says he was flying a spy plane for the United States, which was a total embarrassment to Eisenhower. Now, what would we do today? We would cover that up. We would lie about it. We would backtrack. Eisenhower literally came out and said, I got caught with my hand in a cookie jar, we were spying, and I lied to the American public. And that's probably why a lot of people liked Eisenhower. So that U-2 incident kind of torpedoed that peace conference from ever happening, and we never were able to sit down and discuss a nuclear arms race. All right. Well, this concludes the 1950s. All right. Hopefully it helps your reading a little bit tonight, and we appreciate you listening to the Kuhn Academy, where we're not just learning history, we're making history.